Tori, we've come up to taxes now. We've talked about some of the big spending programs, but there are a
My
couple
favorite
of
subject.
questions that we have relative to taxes. And the first one is, quote, extending the 2017 tax cuts for individuals and small businesses will cost approximately 2.5 trillion over the next 10 years. Do you support extending those tax cuts? And if so, how would you offset the cost?
So let me give people just a little bit of backstory. In 2017, Republicans had unified control of government. House, Senate, and President Trump was in the White House. And one of their primary objectives was to pass a tax cut for businesses because we were losing a lot of our corporate tax base to more tax-friendly locations abroad. So they passed this tax bill, but in order to get it through the House and the Senate, there were a lot of small businesses that were saying, hey, if you're going to give corporations a big tax cut, I want one too. And of course, if you're going to give small businesses a tax cut, individuals are like, hey, wait a minute, we get a tax cut too. So when they put this tax bill together, they used a process called reconciliation, which has a whole bunch of rules and restrictions behind it. But essentially, to get this bill through Congress under the rules of reconciliation, they decided to make the tax cuts for small businesses and individuals temporary, and they expire at the end of 2025. And that is one decision that the next president of the United States and members of Congress are going to have to deal with. These are tax cuts that affect, middle income working Americans and small business owners. And there's going to be a lot of political pressure next year on the campaign trail for especially candidates for federal office to say, how would you vote on extending the 2017 tax cuts? And I would expect every member, Republican or Democrat, to say, yes, I support extending those tax cuts. I don't want to raise taxes for middle income, hardworking Americans. But it comes, as you say, with a cost, $2.5 trillion over the 10-year budget window. And it's even bigger than that when you think about, okay, these tax cuts, they expire in 2025, which is only part of the way through the budget window. So we're only talking about, maybe 7 years of cost when we say extending these tax cuts or making them permanent would cost $2.5 trillion. On a permanent basis, it's probably it is bigger than that. So, the question that we really need to be posing to our elected officials is, okay, I get it. You're going to extend these tax cuts, but I want to know how you're going to pay for them. Where are you going to cut spending elsewhere? Or where are you going to raise revenue elsewhere? Because if they say they're not, they're just going to make the deficit problem and future debt even larger. And I know there's going to be a lot of conversation about how, tax cuts pay for themselves, tax cuts, increase, economic growth. And there is just tons of economic literature out there that says that ain't so. So I think the biggest question out there is, okay, politicians, I get it. You're going to extend these tax cuts. How are you going to pay for them?
And it's important to note that when we talk about these budget deficits averaging $2 trillion over the next 10 years, that is a baseline convention, which means that, what you just described as these expiring tax cuts, that is assumed to happen, that the tax cuts are going to magically go away at the end of 2025, even though you have most politicians saying we're not in favor of that happening.
Right. So yeah, if you're afraid of $2 trillion in deficits every year, then you really should be concerned about how lawmakers are going to pay for extending these tax cuts. Because then we're not talking about $2 trillion in deficits every year. We're talking about, 2.2, 2.3, 2.4, $2.5 trillion deficits every year.
Yeah, I think that's one of those questions that you won't get a lot of. You really need to press people on that one and ask what the trade-offs are, because it's so very easy to say, I'll never let taxes go up on the middle class.